Everybody doing well this morning? Okay, don't talk to me. Let me tell you a little funny story just to get started this morning. See if I can tell it right. A Jewish guy goes in to see his rabbi. And he says, Rabbi, you won't believe what happened. He's my oldest son. He left home, and he became a Christian. And the Jewish rabbi says, shh, you're kidding me. He goes, you'll never guess what happened. My oldest son left home and became a Christian. And the guy says, I can't believe it, Rabbi. What are we going to do? And the rabbi says, we got to pray. We got to pray. So they begin to pray. And all of a sudden, God says, you'll never guess what happened. Okay. Yeah. That's a time joke. You'll get it in time. Well, everybody here today in this room is involved significantly in ministry, involved significantly in building the house of the Lord. And
Welcome.
We all carry that responsibility.
Great to have you here.
From time to time, I find it's important.
So
to
we are here to talk about healthy team
that God
or
has
a strong
for his
team.
So
thank you for taking
we
the
all
time
need
for this.
reminders. We all need
Yo.
to kind of come back to that.
Yeah, I'm excited for this
ground
session.
zero and say,
Yeah.
what is this really all about? What's
Yeah,
at the
come
heart of
on.
what God wants to do in his house.
Hey,
And I'm not sure about
that's
you,
right. Sounds a little, looks a
probably
little
true
French.
for you as it was for me.
Yeah.
When
There you
when
go.
Jan
If
and
you don't
I-
have the notes,
go ahead.
if you can raise your hand. If you don't have the notes, we have notes for you.
Raising our kids, we were particular about things in our home, just like probably you are. And there were certain things, we had certain rules and certain
Right.
standards and the way we did
All
certain
good.
things. And
Excellent.
And, if our kids
So I've got an
violated
hour-ish. All right.
something, then
So just to
they face
Just
the
to let you know who I am, I'm Claude Lainey.
More importantly, we
I've got
tried
a
to
French
explain
background.
to our
I
kids
was born in
the
Quebec.
reasons why we had
I grew
those
up in
things
Ontario
in place
in
to
a
understand
bilingual
that
setting.
the home is the place where
My parents
you
only
develop
spoke French.
relationships.
I did my Bible
It's the
college
place where you
seminary in
develop
Montreal,
respect,
so
your
I'm-
worldview is shaped. Things like
I'm French. I
kindness
was
and fairness
parachuted
and
into an
working
English
together
setting in
and
Manitoba,
serving and all those things
God
that
called
cultivated,
us 18 years
in
ago
seed
to
form in the
Manitoba.
home.
And
so,
it's been an amazing
we
journey.
just
We've
had
seen God's
standards every so often.
God's faithfulness in so many different
especially as
ways.
the kids got into their
And
teen
I'd like to
years,
talk about
the boys
having a
particularly
healthy
would try to
team
sneak
in the
things into
context of the
house that,
story.
like
Because
movies or something that-
if I go
that
back
were
in
beyond the-
in
what was
05,
allowed in our home.
the church
And,
was divided. Actually,
just
when
to
I
make
went in,
a point of that,
the
if I
leadership
found
didn't
it,
really tell
I'd
me the
just chuck it.
truth of the state of the church.
And even
there
if
was
they rented
three
it.
major clans.
And
there was
they'd
one
say,
that was
hey, they always go to Mom,
contemporary, another one that was conservative,
She goes, "Yeah, you better
and
talk to
another
Dad
one that
about
was
that."
cessationist.
And of course, they didn't
And I
want to
was
talk
not
to me
aware
about
of that
But I
clan
would find that
because
movie,
they
I just chuck-
boycotted
I
the
just, you know,
vote
I said,
when
"Well, I threw that out.
that we came in. So
Dad!
so the
I said,
thing
"What?"
there was about
Told you not to
30%
bring
of the
that in
people
my
that didn't show to the votes
So-
for the vote. And so when I came in, it was like, okay, that's the reality of things. So G12, I said, you know what? I don't think it would work here if I would just adopt G12, but if I adapt it and see what really, really works, then I think we can do something. And one of the principle that I realize is if I have a team, if I'm able to rally people around the vision, first of all, we had to define vision. We'll talk about that in a moment. If I was able to rally people, then we could do something. And that's exactly what we did. Just to give you a snapshot of where we are today. At that time, we were around 140. In the process of growth, because we had 3 different clans, we lost 80% of the adults in a period of 3-4 years. And right now, we're running at, like last weekend, I don't know, but the weekend before, we were 1,500 people. We have a campus that Brad and Crystal are leading with 160 people last weekend. That's pretty fantastic. We have around 500 volunteers. We have a staff of, it's always changing, 25 staff, 15 full-time, 10 part-times. So you look at the progress, it's been unbelievable. But I think one of the central thing was a focus on teams. And the goal was to imagine if we can create a team for every ministry, and every ministry creates a team, and it's if we can have a base focus on team. I really believe it works. I really believe that when we look back at the journey, even though I did not know all the details, I realize now hindsight that it was about God's presence. It was about teams. I remember at one point, we were early in the journey. At that time, Brad, I believe, was 1 day a week, and Jonathan, our worship leader, was 1 day a week. And we were praying in the nursery, and I was saying, God, like we believe in hearing God, like listen prayer. So we were doing listen prayer. And as I was doing listen prayer, I saw myself in the water up to my knees, and I'm blue in the face because I want people to come in the water, and just a selected few were coming in the water. And I hear this whisper in my heart, Claude, how's your weather? How's your weather? And in where we live in Winkler, we are in southern part of Manitoba, and it's still like very windy and very cold, if you know Manitoba, and some of you have come to Manitoba, and it's a little cold, right? And yes, it is. But if you go to Churchill, it's even colder. It's crazy. This is where you have polar bears. So if you look at Churchill, it's crazy cold. And so the whisper in my heart was, is it Cancun weather? We know where Cancun is, eh? Is it Cancun weather or Churchill weather? And I had to say, God, I don't know. It's not Churchill weather, but it's not Cancun weather. And the message was, well, work on your weather. Not that I can create a weather, but I can create a favorable climate. And there's 2 aspects with that climate. It's presence, because take a little rabbit trail here, like our services was 3 hymns, offertory, kids feature, a roaming mic, a ton of announcements, and 15 minutes of preaching. And so we were saying, how do we change? How can we become a presence church? So long story short is we have become a presence church. But the climate was focus on presence. And that's what John was talking this morning. Focus on presence, but also focus on unity. And the unity is based on teams, working and functioning together. So we worked hard on developing a culture of God's presence, but at the same time creating a culture of teams. And we saw lots of fruit of that. So what I'd like to do is just to break that down when it comes to what I think it's important. How do we have a healthy team? And how do we see teams grow and people buying in division? Well, you have the notes. The first one is a healthy leader gives birth to a healthy team. If you're not healthy, you won't have a healthy team. If you're not strong, and strong doesn't mean giftings, and we know the qualification in 1 Timothy, it has nothing to do with gifting. The focus is on character. For sure you want to see the Holy Spirit flow through you. For sure you want to see the manifestation of God, but it's who you are. God doesn't anoint systems, He anoints people, right? Ian Bound says that. Like we're looking for better systems, we're looking for methods, but God is looking for people that are available and vulnerable and wanting to grow, right? And so I believe that if we want to be a healthy team, if we want to have a team, we need to be healthy. And I like the first one is that I need to be invested leader. My people, my leaders will know if I'm in the game. If I'm a punch card pastor, they'll see that, they'll smell that. I remember going back, like if I go back, I remember I had to make a decision to have a tombstone in Winkler. Like you got to realize that I'm not Mennonite, and I'm nor English, I'm French, and the culture was totally different. We felt that the only thing we had in common was the same money. We had the same money, and besides that, it was so different. And so I remember I needed to come to a point where, am I willing to die here? I needed to cross that bridge. And I think that was groundbreaking for me to say, okay, I'm willing to go. Am I willing to sacrifice? Am I willing to walk in integrity, in generosity, and lay my life down? And I believe that's one of the key things that we're always challenged to do, and it never stops. But we got to remember that if we want to have an awesome team, they got to see you bleed. Bleeding is part of the game. When COVID hit, like we were all like different rules for different provinces. We were allowed 100 people. So we said, hey, we got like 1,200 people in church. What do? Like 100 people a week, right? And so what we did is we decided to have 6 services on Sunday. And some weekends we had 8. So we said to the people, they'll be there every 2 weeks. And so it was a lot of sacrifice, a lot of pain. I remember sitting in my office after 5 times. I didn't know where I was anymore. Like, okay, am I still preaching? Am I done? Is there one more? I remember finishing the 6th time. I was saying, is there one more? Like, I was totally confused. I was lost. But I believe that gave credibility to my team because they also had to lead 6 times the worship, and they also had to greet people 6 times, and so on, right? And so if we want to have a healthy team, it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It starts with you. It starts with your willingness to sacrifice and lay your life down. And it's so important, right? And one of the points I have here is that you need to be there. You need to decide if you're going to invest in your local church. If you want to have because the focus for me is on the local church here, like leadership in the local church. And if I want to have a great influence on my church, I got to be there. You know, I've got to decide what's my mission. I've got to decide, okay, how does that work? Am I called to go outside and minister here and there? And I'm not saying it's wrong, but you got to decide what is your mission. And if you want to create an awesome team, you got to be there. Even though sometimes you would prefer to be elsewhere, I think that you got to peg your tent and say, okay, I'm going to focus on the mission that God is calling me. I'll say no to invitations. I'll say no to here and there because my first priority is my local church. And I know there's other people that have different callings and they're called to step in their calling, and that's fantastic. But if you want to have a healthy team, you got to be there. Otherwise, it won't happen. You can't delegate that. Like I have John here as my executive pastor or Brenton as my associate pastor. I can't delegate that. You know, maybe at one point when we are in a transition of passing the baton, maybe then. But until then, no, I've got to realize that's my calling and I got to focus on it and give myself to it, right? So I think that's a big part. And also when it comes to a healthy leader, it's the love that you have for the people. Like it should transpire that you love the people. That it's not about you, it's not church growth, it's not size, it's not whatever. It's that you're in love with the people. And that's contagious. You want to have a healthy team? Love the people. Show your team what it is to love the people by being there, by what you do and by your prayers, when you pray together, when you do ministry, that your team knows that really the bottom line, it's all about the people. If there's no people, there's no church. Right? And so you want to see that. Number 4 is to be emotional healthy, your self-worth, to know Father, right? And remember in the 90s when most of us, we were hit by the renewal movement and from Toronto, we discovered the Father's love. I know I did. I saw Father as a taskmaster. And when I came to know him as a Father, changed everything, right? And so you want to be emotionally healthy where your self-worth is found in him, where you're inner secure, like when you don't care of what people say, when you don't compare. You're just happy to be in your skin, right? You're just happy to be you. And then you minister from being you. Doesn't matter what's your background, doesn't matter where you're from, you're just you. And I believe that God anoints you, right? And so to have a healthy team, you got to be emotionally healthy. It's spiritual health too. Like you cannot give what you don't have. You know, you can't go on the fumes of the past, like we heard that this morning. We need to be fueled by God all the time, right? Personal growth, absolutely. Like if you don't feed yourself, if you're not ahead, then you're going to find yourself behind. So you got to feed yourself, right? And some of us are readers, some of us are, I find for me what works a lot is by asking questions. I like to ask questions. I like to call people. When I do a trip like this one here, I'll try to make sure, like I didn't do it this time because we're a big group coming together. But if we're like, I'm going to a conference and I'm like with like Michelin or someone else, I'd like to go visit some pastors and I make appointments in advance and I knock on their door and say, hey, you know, how are you doing things? I don't know how many times I did that. And it was very fruitful for me to do that. And so you want to grow, so you find the way that challenges your growth the most, and you do that. So again, my focus, I just mentioned that, my focus or our focus should be not on performance, but on being you. It's to accept your humanity, that you're not perfect, and to have grace towards yourself, and not to live with a ministry switch on, right? I think it was more like that when I started in ministry. It was like ministry mode, ting, you know, I think the next generation, they're not too keen on the ministry mode. They want you to be you. And so I think that's really cool when it comes to being a healthy leader. It's just be you, be real, be approachable. I like what Rochelle says, sorry. People may admire you for your strengths, but they will connect with you through your weaknesses. And I think that's important for a leader, just to be you, to admit when you screw up, to be genuine when it comes to life. It's just to be real. And I think this is one thing that we really, really aim for as a team. It's to be real. It's not a show. It's not something that you pump up. Just be you. And it might be simple. That's what we try to make sure, it's to keep integrity of being real. And I think that's contagious. And I have to say, by that, you draw more people around you because there's association. They see you as normal, and it gives a chance to the runner. So when we're untouchable and we're very performance-oriented, I know I would be, if I have a leader, the way I'm wired, if I have a leader that is very performance-oriented, I will not be drawn because I will feel I'm not good enough. But if I have a leader that looks at me and doesn't just focus on the stars that are shiny in the sky, but that sees that maybe there's other stars that are further than us, and they're still stars, and they focus on you, it's amazing what kind of treasure you'll find. There's some stars that we have in our sky that are phenomenal, but because they're not as close, we miss them. And I think one of the ways to be able to tap into that is being real and being available. And I believe that when you create that culture, then you draw a lot of people around you that you would never think. You know, I think that's so cool. To be a leader among equals, I think it seems you don't have to say, I'm the lead pastor. Don't have to say it, it just happens. Because people see it on you, but at the same time you lead, but among equals, like you listen, you give, you have an open heart to people around you. So the bottom line, it's never stop seeing yourself as a servant. I need to see myself serve my team. One of my favorite verses when it comes to leadership is found in 1 Corinthians chapter 4, verse 1. It says, so look at Paul and me as mere servants of Christ, who have been put in charge of explaining God's mysteries. Now a person who is put in charge as manager must be faithful. I like if you break that down, it's look at us. We are example. The calling of a leader is to be an example. And how do you lead? By being a mere servant. And the word servant here is the one that is rowing in the bottom of a boat. It's not doulos. It talks about being in the lower part of the boat and you're rowing. You're not there beating the drum. You're there rowing. And because of your commitment and your giving yourself, you know what? You're going to gain more rowers. Because people will see it on you, will see the call on you, and say, the boat is going somewhere. I want to be there. And they will go in the lower part of the boat, and they will row with you. And so how do you lead? By being a rower. And the job description, it's explaining God's mystery, meaning the focus is on the gospel. Because that's what Paul was all focusing on, like the gospel. And the requirement to lead, it's to be faithful. That's the only thing that I felt I had to offer. Here I am, right? You're faithful, and God honors faithfulness. So when it comes to creating a strong team, it cannot bypass you. You're the funnel. It's you. It's through you. If you're not healthy, don't expect to have a healthy team. Because it has to be organic, right? It's not systematic, it's organic, right? It's caught. So you want to see that in your life. So number 2, how to have a strong team, it's learning to celebrate and value each other. Learning to verbalize and affirm and encourage. And to be sincere and truthful, right? One of the things that I feel it's important as we lead a church, it's to celebrate small victories. One of the challenges I had, and you have, and we do have, is that it's hard to gauge success in the church, right? Like 2 years ago, we had a house built, and there's a start and there's a finish. But in ministry, there's a start and it never finishes, right? It's hard because you think that you are there and it just goes on. It's like, for those that are a little older, the old Nintendo games, it's like the screen was, you never knew, like there was a black part of the screen that was not, the graphic was not revealed yet, and you didn't know what was coming on the other side of the corner because it was not there yet. The graphics were not good enough. Graphic cards were not good enough. And it's like, you don't know, it never ends, right? And ministry is like that. It seems like it never ends. So you got to celebrate small victories. If you don't celebrate small victories with your staff, they'll get discouraged because it's such a big picture. So you got to break it down, like celebrate. Like I was telling Brad, when Grow started, let's have a party. Grow is our kids ministry. So in our campus, they didn't really had structured kids ministry. And so for the first time 2 weeks ago, they had their first Grow. So celebrate that, right? We got to celebrate that. And so it's important to celebrate the small victories because the big ones, it's hard to define which is a big victory, but we know what the small ones are, so you focus on that. Don't forget to be grateful and thankful for your team and not to take them for granted. At the same time, realize there's no one perfect, but at the same time, don't compromise your values. I'll talk about that. You can't compromise too. You can't, like your goal is not to make everyone happy. You're responsible for the leadership of your church, so you got to lead. To invest resources and time in your team, I think that's a good thing to do. You invest time and resources. You help them to grow. You try to do your best to give them the tool to grow. For sure, they have to choose, but you can help them to grow. It's making room to have fun and laugh. Like what we did, when was that? Last spring, we had a war in church. I all bought the staff kind of a bow and arrow. And it's not a Nerf one. It hurts. And so the thing when it's a close shot, you don't want to get hit. So it's more like there's more interaction, right? So we were fighting for the flag in the church, and we have an elevator, and so we placed the flag, or Brenton placed the flag not on top of, like he brought the elevator halfway. And so it's hard to get the flag because you got to wait for the elevator to go up and down. But the best way to do is just to jump in it, right? So someone jumped in the elevator, broke it. But like we had a lot of fun. We got this bow and we went hunting for each other in church. And when the guy came to fix the elevator, wanted to know what happened. So the custodian told the story. He said, "What kind of church are you, But I'm saying this, and I'm saying we should have more fun. We should laugh more. We're we want to make it hard for people to go to hell. That's the mission of the church. At the same time, we have to have fun in the journey. I like to say, when it's not fun, It's not fun, right? So you want to have fun. So you want to give room for fun and laughter and even cry together. Number 6, I don't know, I hope I have the same point as you because I did some modification. Okay, cool. People are more important than their position. One of the things we did is that we don't hire based on roles. We hire based on people. And so someone in our staff may change multiple times of multiple roles. So we don't want to say, hey, we have a youth pastor when he's not doing the job, boot, or when this time is done, boot. Is like, okay, where would he fit? Where does he fit on the bus? And I think that's important for lead pastors to think about that, is to create a team. Longevity is the goal. Longevity is the goal. But at the same time, longevity has challenges, right? But longevity is way more fruitful than hire and fire. And even when it comes to super volunteers, we have 3 levels. We have staff, super volunteers, and volunteers. And most of our staff, they were all at one point super volunteers. So they just grow into that role, right? So we move people around based on their calling, based on the needs. So, I like when Leon Fontaine was alive, I remember hearing his comment, and I remember going to his church and asked some questions there too. And he was saying, no pastors has any title in our church. Like, it was a church of, 4,000 people, and nobody had a title. But what he was trying to do at that time, he wanted to change the mindset of the leadership or the staff to say, oh, this is mine, or this is mine. He stripped everything away, and he was saying, well, you're just going to serve where there's a need, and we're going to start from scratch. And that was a big rude awakening for the staff, but I understood what he was trying to say, because what happens is we get attached to your ministry, and at the same time, you can be parallel to that, you can hire and fire, and instead, why don't we serve God, and if it doesn't work, let's try to find another spot. But at the same time, there's times that it just doesn't work, and then you have to address it, right? So, free advice when it comes to hiring staff, I would invite you to hire people part-time. If they're local, if they can, part-time, it's the best way to see people step in. And this is where you find their character, this is where you find their faithfulness, this is where they take hold of the DNA, is little by little. And that's what we did for lots of our staff. Like the ratio right now, I don't know how, like I said, how many did I say we had? We had 10 part-time right now. And so that's what Morden, probably John is saying, how does he get all the, I added Morden with that. So, yeah. Okay, where am I now? All right. So, yeah, you start them part-time if you can. It's amazing how as the church grow, then you always have someone that you can grow into, right? So I have in my notes here, be careful with titles. Give titles to people. It might go to their heads, but it also may crush them. So let's say you give a certain title to a guy that's working full-time, and you say, you are this. You know what, this guy is going to go home and work full-time in his job, and then think he's got to be full-time in ministry, and it's just going to crush him. So you got to be careful when it comes to giving titles to people. You got to find the right time before you tell them that they're youth pastor or so on, because I found that people take that role very seriously, and what happened is that sometimes they run themselves down and they run their family down. So just a freebie. Number 3, investing in the pipeline, raising up your own leaders. I think this is so central when it comes to have a healthy team. It's to create system and to make disciples and to have a leadership development. I think that's so important if you can. It's to have a discipleship school, to have a mentorship where you have maybe once every 2 years you have a track that focuses on leaders, but you want to focus on the pipeline. We have, like in my area right now, there's aging pastors and there's no pipeline. They don't know what they're going to do when they're going to retire because there's no one behind them. There's nobody growing behind them. And it's like unreal. I don't know if the Lord tarries in 10 years from now, this is going to be a whole mess. There's going to be a lot of churches that will be knocking at your church saying, hey, we need help because They have no one in their pipeline, no one. And so what you want to do is you want to create a system where you can train and develop people. And you train your super volunteers and your staff with that mindset that their goal, it's not to do ministry. When we hire now, we don't say, oh, you're going to be hired for this position. No. You're going to be hired to create a team for that position. So it's about always creating teams. First of all, if we just hired a pastoral care, poor guy, how does he pastoral care 2,000 people? You can't. But you can create teams. But even when you're small, if you start with that mindset, wherever you are in the spectrum, is that you want to hire, or even when it comes to full-time staff, part-time staff, or super volunteers, you've got to teach them, or you got to let them know that it's not about them doing the job, but empowering people to do the job. And I think that's the best way to do it when it comes to growing and having, investing in the next generation. So like number 4, I believe, is the primary purpose of the staff is to create teams. So every staff or every super volunteer is responsible to create team. So, so the pipeline is huge, and you got to look at, okay, what am I doing to create a pipeline? So what's next? If the Lord tarries and we're here in 30 years, so what's going to happen with your church, right? And so you don't want it to die when you move on, or you don't want to work all these years, 20 years of involvement in the church, and then having kind of someone that's parachuted take over. And I'm not that it's wrong, but you know, you don't want to see the DNA and all the investment just slip away, especially when it's birthed by God, right? So investing in the pipeline, I think that's a big piece. Number 4, like I could say, well, that's a bigger piece, but I think that's an important thing. It's to have a buy-in. You want to have a healthy team. You know how you'll have a healthy team is when there's a buy-in. When there's a buy-in in the values and the practices. When you define your values, you define your practices, and then you implement them, there's a buy-in into that. People say, yeah, I believe in that. Yeah, I'm going to put time into that. Yeah, I will invest energy into this. And at the same time, this is the greatest tool to draw people to be volunteers. When the values and the practices are understood, and I'm looking for the word here, when they're implemented. Like, do you remember when you read Rick Warren's, for those that are a little older, The Purpose-Driven Church? I remember reading it, I believe, in 92. So that's a long time ago. And I was so shocked by this book because no one taught me of purpose and values and vision. You know, in Bible college, they taught me the word. But they never talked about leadership, right? So I was amazed by it. So what I did is I said, hey, let's have a mission statement. I had a mission statement and, okay, what we're here for. But I had no implementation plans. So how do you see your values come to life? Is when you have implementation, where you create systems around your values, right? And so when you create systems around your values and your practices, then people are seeing your values and practices in action. And so when they see this in action, it draws them and it wins them over first to serve, but also keeps them going because they see the fruit of it because it works. You know? So you want to define your values and practices, and I think that's so important because I did not know that. I remember having the pieces on the table. Okay, this is what I want to see done, but I had no implementation plan. And I think what was significant for us as a team, it's to focus on implementation. For example, we heard this morning, prayer is important. Yeho, yeah, it's so true. What's my implementation plan? So how am I going to see prayer in my church? So I've got to sit back and talk with my team and process that on my, like for me, I'll say, I've got to sit on my thinking chair and say, God, how do I bring implementation? So you bring implementation, and it takes a while to create culture and to change the DNA. We're all aware of that. You don't change DNA overnight. It takes a while. But then you sit, you look at your values and you say, are you implementing your values? How are you doing that? I think that's a huge buy-in for your people. Because I guess I'm addressing how to have a strong team, but I cannot walk away from that. I cannot walk away from the thought of adding to the team. because we're growing and we want to multiply. So I cannot say, let's invest in a team without thinking about how am I growing the team. And if I want to see the team grow, I've got to know my values and my practices, and I've got to live them out, and it has to transpire through the church, and I believe there's a buy-in. You know, a buy-in is not promising things that you cannot give. And sometimes as leaders we do that, right? So I believe the buy-in is when they see your values alive and fruitful, and they say, I want to be part of that, and it's real. I believe that implementation of your values gives credibility and draws people on board. And people want to be led by someone who knows where he's going or she's going, right? And value and practices give clarity and set boundaries, because most people don't know what to do. It's like, this is a football, right? You got to start from the scratch. People don't know what to do. So when you have boundaries, when you have values and practices, and when you implement them, you're giving boundaries to people to say, this is where we're heading. I think there's, in the book of Making of a Leader from Frank DiMaggio, there's the picture of all the arrows. And you want to see all the arrows go in the same direction. That's alignment, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But what you want to see is to see your values and practices be defined so that they can be reproduced. So what is the goal of your ministry team? It's to reproduce your values and your practices. And it's not to say you got a calling, well, like fulfill your calling. No, walk in alignment, right? And I believe that when you define your values and your practices, you're removing all the gray zones. And you need to remove the gray zones where there's no guessing and no freelancing. If there's freelancing and guessing, you know, it's not going to go very far, because your leadership will be your bottleneck. And why is that? Is because everybody's going and doing their own thing. It might be good, but it doesn't work like that. Like no business functions like that, but we see that all the time in the church, right? So you need to define your DNA. What's the culture you're creating? What I like to do is I like to close my eyes and think about the dream church. Okay, what is a dream church? How do you see church, God? And then just thinking about that, I have a smile, right? Because, that's so cool. I see worship. I see, kids being touched by God and kids ministry, and the list goes on. And God says, okay, what are you going to do about it? Right? And so I've got to do something about what I believe are the values and the practices, but I've got to tell you, this is so, so powerful, because this is where people will have a buy-in. And leading by default or design, I think that's a huge topic, right? And the sad part is that in my region, most pastors are leading by default, not by design. They go from Sunday to Sunday. They read a book, they run with that book for a while, or they go to a conference, they run with what they got at the conference. They don't know where they're going. They haven't set like a map. They haven't set goals and say, okay, for us, a life-giving church means this. So you have to define what is a life-giving church. You define it, and then you aim and you go towards that, and this is where you create an awesome team. And there's a buy-in. I like to say at my partnership class, my membership class, is like our bus, like the church is a bus. We're going to, let's say, Winnipeg. We're not an hour and a half from Winnipeg. We're going to Winnipeg. And if people are wanting to go to Brandon or they want to go to another city, we're saying we're not going there. And I look at the people that are there that are deciding if they're going to be members, we call it partners or not, and we're saying we're not going in that direction, we're not going in this direction, we're going in that direction. Do you want to join? So it's very clear. It's not wishy-washy. We remove all the gray zones to the point that some people don't come back. But it's okay, because what's most important for a church is our DNA. And what you want for your leaders, it's the same DNA. If you don't have the same DNA, then your leadership is in trouble, right? It's having measurable faith and not having abstract faith. What I mean by that is that you bring reachable goals. Like I've got this guy that in a neighboring town, he has on his mission statement on his website, our plan is to have 100 church in the next 10 years of 1,000 per church. And I met his executive pastor. Like his tongue was on the floor. He was almost tripping on his tongue. And I think about the congregation where you have goals that are not reachable. It sounds very spiritual. Let's have 100 church of 1,000 people in the next 10 years. Yay, yay. Rah, rah. In his church, there are 300. So why don't you have 1,000 already before you go plant 100 churches of 1,000 people, 99 churches of 100 people? It seems very spiritual, but that discourages your team. So you got to set goals that are reachable. And it doesn't seem spiritual, but it works. Like when you say, hey, let's do this, let's do that, and you go from there. And then what happens is that the level of faith increases because you have a track record of fulfilling what you said. And if you want to discourage your team, it's not to fulfill what you believe God is calling you to do. I know there's some goals that you can't reach. It's beyond you, like Hebrews chapter 11 with the heroes of the faith. But at the same time, Abraham still left Ur, and he still went to the promised land, even though he never saw it to himself. He saw it later on, but he still went. It was a journey and a process. So you want to map that out. Otherwise, your team gets discouraged, and otherwise, you don't draw people in your team. If it's unreachable goals, and you might call it faith, you won't get people jumping on board. You see there's a balance here. You got to have faith. Like, I look at our steps and your steps. There's faith, steps of faith that are taken, absolutely. But what you want is measurable goals, like where your faith is measured, and then you can say to people, hey, look what God has done. Then we can move on. Look what the Lord has done. And then you move on from there. And not just to be caught with the big picture. For me, I get caught with the big picture. But Joe Below in church, he doesn't see the big picture, but he sees the small picture. So I'm called to do that, to reveal and share that big picture. I've just got to go faster here. African proverb, when you run alone, you run fast, but when you run together, you run four. So you want to create a buy-in with the DNA, with the values and practices. Like I said earlier, it's to remove all the gray zones. I did that already here, sorry. Number 5, no alignment, no growth. No information silos, no organization silos. No undercurrents tolerated, no mediation permitted. By that is that someone comes in the name of someone else. Like in our staff, you can have a staff system. Do you know that someone else in the staff is like this? Well, my answer would be, let him come and talk. No mediation permitted, because that creates division. So no undercurrent tolerated. Everyone goes in the same direction. And that's very clear. You go from every ministry to one ministry and to the other. It has to be the same DNA. Like in our section of the country, is you have the youth that is very vibrant and the mother church that's dead. So you don't want to see that. You want to see the same DNA everywhere, right? And so it might be different expression, but we want to see alignment. You know what I did? At one point, I connected with churches, like some big churches in BC, and also in Winnipeg. I went to see the biggest churches in Winnipeg, and I said to the pastors, I invited them for lunch, and I asked them, so what would be one of the key ingredient when it comes to growth? And there was one common denominator that was in every conversation I had, was my team is aligned. I was shocked by it. I was not expecting that answer. They were talking about alignment. Then I didn't even know what it meant, right? So I went back, so what does it mean to be aligned and to walk in alignment? And I was shocked. So to have a healthy team, if you want to have a healthy church, then you need to have alignment. So we're not talking here about uniformity. We're talking about unity and purpose, right? And to speak the same language where everyone is accountable without exception. The other thing I think it's needed when it comes to alignment is to make sure that your structure facilitates growth. And you got to review that all the time when it comes to your team. You got to review your structure. Is it healthy? Is it going? Is it functional? What's the stats? Or every 7 years you should go back and not reinvent the wheel, but look at how you can structure your team differently. And so I think that's important. A healthy and structure and church government will encourage a strong team. Because if you don't have that, then your team will be discouraged. Because there's going to be red tape, complications, and so on. Structure is there to facilitate ministry, not the other way around. And the older you get as a church, well, your structure becomes your stumbling block, or your how do you call it? Something attached to your leg or your feet. Like how do you call that? A ball, like a cannonball. Yeah, thank you. There you go. So don't be afraid to go to your whiteboard. Number 6, my last point. So I'm pretty good. I'm almost good. Yeah, it's good. It's the need to clarify, clarification, or to clarify. It's to make sure with your team that you understand. There's where people understand the difference between expectation and reality. I think that unclear expectation is open to interpretation. And when there's unclear expectation, then there's division, and there's a lack of synergy, and a lack of unity. And it's to be clear with your expectation. It's to learn to communicate. Like for me, I struggle with that, because when people talk, after a while I just hear blah 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 blah. And I remember a lady one time she was talking to me, and I guess my body language just turned. And you're not listening to me, and I realized I was not listening to her. And so communication is huge. I had to grow significantly at that level. And one of the things that really helped me was to ask questions, because this is how I stay focused. I ask questions. If I don't ask questions, or if there's not like a stop and go, if there's just a go, then I just hear blah 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 blah. But there needs to be a stop and go. So learning to communicate is a big piece, right? Learn to listen is an art. It's not easy to listen. So when it comes to clarification on the difference between expectation and reality, it's like you tell one of your staff, hey, we have a meeting tonight, come early. So what is early? For me, early would be at least half an hour before. For another one, it might be 5 minutes. And so I'm early. My definition of early is, let's say we're meeting at 7, at 6:30, and he doesn't show up. I'm upset. He's late. Come on, I told him early. But for him, early is 5:02. So lack of clarification, it's not good. So what you want for a healthy team, you want to communicate. And I think I could have placed that number 1, because I think this is so important, to learn to communicate. And not just to hear, but to listen what the other is trying to say. Because like we're driven. If you're a lead pastor, there's a good chance that you're driven. I know I am. And because of that, sometimes I have selective hearing. And so I'm just focused on what I'm called to do, and then I hear blah, 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 blah. And so I need to listen, and I need to realize that what the other person is trying to convey is very important. I need to learn to listen. And so that's a big part. Healthy team, that could talk about the leader, but it's also teaching people to listen to each other and not just to talk, right? Because we're great in talking. It's number 5 here, if I just go a little faster, is it's teaching others to think and dream on their own. One of the things that I try to do is when a staff, especially a staff of super volunteers, it's a little different because I don't really deal with super volunteers now. But when a staff comes with a problem, I like to say, go back to your office and find a solution and bring me the solution to your problem. Because I'm not here to fix your problem, right? And so it's important to let the people dream on their own and let them solve their problem on their own. But come and see me to make sure that it's a good solution, right? But it's important to empower your team. Like a lack of self-worth, you don't do that. Because you want to be the king, and you want to be recognized, you want to be seen. Like, I don't have a quote here, but a good leader is not about you, it's about others doing what they're called to do, right? And that's what we should focus on. So to create a healthy team, the team should be allowed to dream on the path of values and practices, not on their own, like to say whatever they want to do, they do. But they're allowed to dream when it comes to what they're calling, like the way they want to express their calling, and the boundaries of the values and the practices. Because what has the last words is the values and the practices. That's what has authority. And so when your team is aligned with the values and practices, this is where, well, again, like I said, it creates momentum. And at the same time, like I'm repeating myself, it shows, it gives a direction of where we should go. And so we celebrate diversity and creativity by that when you give room for people to think. And this is where you have micromanagement, you know what that means. And this is also, my last point is, it's to understand when it comes to your people, your volunteers, your super volunteers, each one is different, right? It's to discern who are the explorers and who are the anchors. The anchors, they ask a ton of questions, but they're necessary. And the explorers, they don't ask enough questions. They just run. And they're necessary. But you got to make sure that you pastor them well, but you can't pastor them the same. Right? It's to know your staff. It's to know the people you work with. If you want to have a healthy team, you got to know them for who they are. Right? You got to know how they're wired. You got to know how they think. And I think when you're able to do that, I think this is where you can be a well-oiled machine. And that's the goal, right? I'm going to just finish with this thought. Like I said, a healthy team gives birth to a healthy church. Right? There you go. Do you have any questions that you would want to ask? We've got a few minutes to go. Not to say that I have the answers, but I can try to say something. Good? Yes? Mm-hmm. Okay. The keys I'm looking for, like, and how to do it? Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Mm-hmm. Then you look at your values, your practices, and you probably can sum them up to 8-ish, and so that's what you want to see. Like you look at the hearing God prayer, you look at inner freedom when it comes to also Bible-based and so on. You want to see that. But the process is, I think, like for us, we've got a discipleship track, and this is where, for example, someone wants to get involved in the church. It's not really what I don't think that's what you're asking, but it's going to lead to the answer. Is we get people coming in, and there's a discipleship track. For example, you want to serve, you got to be a partner. And you want to get involved with people, we want you to experience a set free. You want to do ministry in the prayer, and then we want you to do an empower and also an altar ministry course. If you want to get involved and grow, there's another track. So that's creating track. And in these tracks, this is where people disqualify themselves. And so we don't disqualify anybody. They disqualify themselves based on the tracks, right? So the tracks are what we follow. And when someone says yes to the tracks and they abide in the tracks, then we see this is where that's our pool of volunteers. But there's different influence when it comes to the local church, right? From serving coffee to being in a prayer room, because we don't really do altar service because we have 3 services back to back. So we invite people to go in the prayer room to receive ministry. So the prayer ministers, they're trained to higher level than the others. So the tracks define. Because we got some people, let's say someone that moves from Texas and comes with a prophetic gift, and they come in our church and they look at our prophetic ministry, because we believe one of the things we teach is we teach people to prophesy. And so they look at our level, it's so low. I don't have to go through the process. Yeah, you have to. And people disqualify themselves and when they don't want to. But the pool is, for example, we have our discipleship school, and so we have right now 20 interns. So that's kind of a pool that we draw from. And every 2 years or so, I bring I call it Making of a Leader from the book from Frank DiMaggio. I'm just using the title really because it's kind of a cool title, Making of a Leader. So I do that every 2 years-ish, where I invite people. I tap on shoulders, and what I do sometimes, I leave it open. I don't know if I'm going to do that again, because last time it was like, wow, okay. But at the same time, I don't want to lose those, don't want to miss out on the stores I don't see, because you never know, right? So anyway, I'm still debating on what to do when it comes to that. But that would be the Making of a Leader, people going through all the tracks. And also, as we connect with all the staff, we talk about the people that are popping up. Right? Oh, you know that one? Because what we do is, like if kids ministry is looking for a volunteer, then we post it on our staff group. Hey, what about this person? Do you know that person? Instead of everybody that we have to do all the screening individually, we do it as a team, right? And so by then, that's one of the ways that we are able to say, hey, did you think about that person? I don't know him, but he is serving on the parking lot or whatever. So that's one of the ways. I don't know if I answer your question. Yeah, I think we only have one. Well, we have one and a half. One that was and left and came back. But all of our staff, all the 25, 24 are from in-house. Yeah, yeah. And the reason why we don't have one is because we need pastoral care. We need to have someone that had no hair or gray hair. And so, John. Well, I wouldn't go with the youth, just to say. Like the typical church in our region would go with the youth. I would not go with the youth. If I look back, hindsight, I would find an administrator first. That's what I would do. I didn't know that then. Like, and when Brad, or kids, another one would be kids ministry. I would try to make Sunday morning the best that I can do. That would be my priority. It would not be side ministries. It would be Sunday morning game day. To make the church, I believe, effective, it's to have a good Sunday morning. That means kids ministry and so on. But if I would start from scratch, I would get someone that would do all the paperwork and all the stuff that takes you away from ministry. That would be my priority. How we started it, well, you were already involved in youth, so you continued in that way. It was worship and it was administration. But again, I know a little better now. I would definitely go with someone that is able to help me out on freeing me from ministry. Yeah, and I would be drawn to have a good Sunday morning, however that looks. And for us, kids is huge, so I would put a lot of energy in kids. I would have a kids pastor before a youth pastor. That's me. Good? See you too. Yeah, my pleasure.